Het ministerie van Onderwijs, Wetenschap en Cultuur heeft een tweedaagse onderwijscongres georganiseerd. Niet alleen met lokale deskundigen, maar ook heel veel internationale expertise is er tijdens de 2 dagen aan bod gekomen. Dit is er alleen maar om het Surinaams onderwijs op alle niveaus gezond te maken. Heel veel paneldiscussies, heel veel inleidingen, heel veel workshops. Trouwens, zoals ik het daarnet aangaf, dit is er om het Surinaams onderwijs wederom op een bepaald niveau te brengen. Tbn PRIMEALERT die was er ook aanwezig en wij voeren nu naar de volgende presentatie.
But I have been a researcher for more decades than I am willing to confess. And so I have learned a few things. And one of the things I've learned about the Surinamese is their immense capacity for generosity, particularly the generosity of your attention to all of this plethora of speakers. So thank you for your attention. And that requires me to respect your attention, so I'll try to not get the anger of the person carrying the tablet. And try also to provide you with something of value, not only because it's important, but also I know that my colleagues and I stand between you and something very dear to Donald's heart, lunch. So thank you very much. I want to advance a very simple argument. Many of our countries have resolved some of the most difficult issues associated with educational policy. Commitment and resources. And really there's no such thing as commitment without resources. That's just rhetorical commitment. But even with commitment and resources, and I would like to point your attention to Professor Ganesh's presentation of yesterday and what he termed the sort of Latin American anomaly, that you might have resources and commitment, but you might not have results that keep pace with your level of resources and commitments. What I'd like to advance in my very simple argument is that that is a design problem. Educational opportunities, educational policies are opportunities to learn. But if you do not design your policies in order to learn from them, you are not taking advantage of those opportunities to learn. So that when evidence and evaluation occurs as an afterthought, you're very unlikely to learn anything of value. All of these elements must be influenced by policy. What happens generally, and I mean this in somewhere, I'm teasing Mr. Curry, but this is the way implementation of policy often occurs. Often, governments announce a policy and begin busily doing implementation activities, often on a very aggressive schedule, right? Because things have to be accomplished by the end of the administration. So there is a milestone in sight. But then what happens? One day, Mr. Curry sitting in his office wants to know what the results are. What impact was there? And then, in many countries of the world, what happens is they realize, oh no, we didn't design evaluation and monitoring into the policy, right? When you retrofit monitoring and evaluation after a policy has been designed fully, you can learn a great deal. You can learn some, but you cannot take full advantage of the opportunity to learn that policy initiatives entail. When evidence is part of the design, then you have taken the best step toward taking advantage of policy initiatives as opportunities to learn. What evidence first design, that I call it, looks like is having clearly defined goals and learning trajectories. It's not merely about deciding what students know at particular milestones, but across the course of the learning trajectory. then your instructional materials and your instruction and teacher training should be aligned to those trajectories. And measurement, evaluation, monitoring should be embedded from the start. It doesn't mean that you're testing more. It means you're designing differently. You're designing policy in order to take advantage of the opportunity to learn. I'm going to refer to three cases that help us learn these things. First is the Center for Excellence in Teacher Training. It was a massive literacy program that began in the early 2000s. It began with a promise made by the U.S. President at the Summit of the Americas, where he committed U.S. resources to addressing literacy challenges in Latin America and the Caribbean. More than 20 countries participated, countries in the Spanish-speaking Central America, in the Southern Cone, and in the English-speaking Caribbean. It focused on teacher training, materials, and classroom support. What it didn't do was design evaluation from the beginning, right? So after about 3 years of operation, this was about a 7-year program, some experts, my good colleague from the University of Toronto in Ontario, advisor to the assessment department in Ontario, Richard Wolf, and myself, were told, all right, you guys figure out how to evaluate the impact of this. Well, we use all kinds of sophisticated statistical techniques that I won't bore you with, but the bottom line is, when you haven't designed that in from the beginning, you're very limited in what you can learn. Right? We know that teaching changed, but was it better teaching? How would we know? My criteria for better teaching is if more learning is taking place. And not whether it complies to some sort of imaginary idea I have about what a good teacher looks like. So we have some evidence from that project that some improvement in teaching occurred, but we really do not have conclusive evidence that learning improved. The IDB, which for some reason, because I grew up in another Caribbean country, in Costa Rica, smaller than your own. I was told that Suriname was the smallest independent country in South America. You're 4 times as large as Costa Rica. So to me, you look enormous. The IADB and the government of Argentina had this tremendously interesting pilot in numeracy education, in which they had true experimental design. They used random assignment to assign students to different instructional modalities. They had designed the evaluation design from the very beginning, and they were able, through this design, to really empower government to make decisions about scaling, particularly mathematics education, based on evidence, not on ideology, not on tradition, but on evidence. Finally, I want to refer to the Dominican Republic. Oh, the Dominican Republic. My colleague, Ms. Acosta, said at the very beginning of her talk, you remember, in every home there is talent. In every country, whether you regard the country as low achieving or high achieving, there are opportunities to learn and leverage point for success. That is true in the Dominican Republic, and it is especially true in Suriname. And it's very important for you to find those leverage points, not really reproduce what others are doing. In the case of our project in the Dominican Republic, evidence was everywhere. 5 years of data on how students learn mathematics in Dominican schools were used to design the curriculum, textbooks, and teacher training. Evaluation was part of the design from the beginning, and evidence was used continuously to refine implementation. During the implementation, when we saw things going poorly, we made corrections. This continuous use of evidence was key to success. At the end of this project, that included a complete randomized controlled design, we saw student learning, particularly mathematics and literacy, that exceeded statistically significantly national norms. Students around the world learn there's no such thing as the zero learning country. We use some shorthands that are unfortunate sometimes. This continuous use of evidence is different from accountability. Evidence was used not merely for auditing. It was used to help teachers and schools understand how they could do their work better. What can we learn across these cases? What we learn across these cases is that what actually scales is clarifying learning trajectories, ensuring that instruction is coherent with those learning trajectories, and embedding evaluation from the start. Scale follows design discipline. What are the implications for Suriname? Start defining what students should learn and the progressions they should follow in order to achieve that learning. Align all of your incentives, services, and teaching with this vision of the learning progressions, and require evaluation designs before taking the first step. If you have not resolved how you're going to answer whether something was a success, then you have no business investing. The bottom line, what scales is not a program, but the discipline of designing instruction and evaluation together from the start.